back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at which way for Congo, and we're pleased to welcome at this point Laurent Mende, who happens to be in Paris, the Minister of Communication. Thank you for being with us, sir.
You're welcome.
Also with us from the Carter Center in Atlanta is David Potty. Laura Sie, who teaches political science at Morehouse College, she's also in Atlanta. And Emmanuel Goujon of Africa Global Approach. Tell us what Africa Global Approach is.
Yeah, it's a consultant company doing some mission on and about Africa and for also some African institutions about different sectors, but especially in business intelligence and things like that.
All right, Emmanuel Goujon, former journalist who covered the civil war in Congo. We were discussing in part one the hurdles that are sort of faced between the two sides. Just a couple of remarks from first on Twitter regarding the swearing-in of Joseph Kabila. Bobel from Johannesburg says the DRC presidential oath is on Friday. Today's was the PPRD's. But Adabong on Facebook writes, must the opposition in Africa always win every election? Why are they always claiming victory even before the results count? They should also learn to accept defeat. So those are some of the remarks we've been having. Again, if you're just joining us, today was the swearing-in for a second term of Joseph Kabila. And the veteran leader of the opposition, Etienne Tshisekedi, says he is going to stage his own swearing-in on Friday.
Regarding those who have created all those problems, starting with Mr. Kabila, I call on all of you to look for this man, wherever he is in the country, and bring him here alive.
All right. What's your reaction to that, Laurent Mende?
This is a kidding. There will not be a swearing-in ceremony, a second one, held on Friday in Kinshasa. I can tell you. And I think that President Tshisekedi of UDPS is well aware of there will not be any swearing-in ceremony. He's just being provocative because this is his way of making politics in our country.
When you say there won't be a swearing-in ceremony, do you mean that he's going to back out of this concept, or do you mean that you're going to prevent him from staging?
It will be prevented because this is an abuse to the Constitution. You can't, organize a ceremony like that after another official ceremony has been organized by the Supreme Court. We have a Constitution, and we know who is able to lead our country. Not somebody who will proclaim himself president. So this will be, I'm sure, impeached by local authorities of the province of Kinshasa.
If he does try to go through with this inauguration ceremony, what will happen?
It won't even start. He won't even join this stadium of the Martyrium Stadium. It won't be organized at all. I can tell you, and Tshisekedi knows it.
All right. We were talking in part one, Emmanuel Goujon, about how the situation is volatile inside of the DR Congo. For those, again, who are just who don't follow this closely, can they fear an Ivory Coast type situation where it descends into bloodshed?
I think there is a very big difference between Ivory Coast during the electoral crisis and DR Congo nowadays. First of all, current president in Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara, had an army, and he was backed and supported by the former rebel forces in order to take over power against the forces of Laurent Gbagbo. It's not the case of Mr. Tshisekedi, who doesn't have any army or any rebel movement able to use force against the armed forces and the security forces of President Kabila. Second, I think the situation is very different too, because the results were not disputed in the same way in the two countries. Here you have formal respect of all the institutions and all the procedures, except on the calendar, which has been changed quite many times. But so far, it has been respected, even if there is disputes on the results and even if the process has not been perfect. So there is now two scenarios for Tshisekedi. Either he enters in a proper political struggle on the model more of the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, for example, with mass demonstrations in the street of Kinshasa, where he has a lot of supporters, or is waiting for the result of the legislative elections. And then maybe there might be different results. Maybe the process will be better, and maybe he will have a space, political space, in order, for example, who knows, to become a prime minister or something like that, where he will be more able maybe to use his own powers and to influence the decision of the state and the government.
Laura Sieh, for those who don't know him, Etienne Tshisekedi is somebody who's a veteran opposition leader. What do you think his next move will be?
It's hard to say. I think Minister Mende is correct that there's no way the government is going to allow him to hold this swearing-in ceremony at the stadium later this week. It's just not. It's not going to happen. When he has tried to stage protests over the last couple of weeks since the election date, his home has been surrounded by security forces, and he has not been permitted to leave. And that seems like the most likely scenario. The approach of his supporters so far seems to be centered around gathering support internationally and trying to stir up interest and attention. So we've seen the Congolese diaspora protesting in New York outside the United States mission to the UN, in Brussels, in London, really anywhere there's a large concentration of Congolese diaspora, you have seen protests, and trying to draw attention and trying to draw that comparison to the Côte d'Ivoire case. But as we've already noted, it's quite different, most particularly in that Tshisekedi does not have an army. And so we're unlikely to see a sort of full-out violent crisis like we did in Côte d'Ivoire. So what will Tshisekedi do under these circumstances? He is making statements that are quite provocative. He has called on the army to essentially defect and come to his defense, to bring Kabila to him alive. That is a rough quote. And these sorts of provocative statements that really could be and probably will be construed by the government as treasonous and as grounds for arresting him. Now, whether he is trying to get arrested, whether he will be arrested is another question. I think the government is well aware that if it arrests Tshisekedi, they are in for mass protests and a lot of trouble. But it's very volatile right now and very unclear what will happen next.
5 years ago, the candidate who opposed Joseph Kabila was a former rebel leader, Jean-Pierre Bemba.
Jean-Pierre Bemba, yes.
Etienne Tshisekedi is a different case.
Of course. Tshisekedi is not Bemba. Tshisekedi is not a rebel. Tshisekedi is not a criminal, though he's making provocative declarations, but he's a politician. And nobody has decided to arrest Tshisekedi. We think that our government has no duty of arresting people. I think it is to the general attorney to see if what he's doing is breaking the law, so it is to the judiciary to decide. But as for now, he's not threatened of being arrested. So we think that if Tshisekedi can answer to the call President Kabila made today, we can land a peacefully solution of the crisis he's trying to create. We think that he can also enjoy some significant support in the parliament to come. Probably some of his members will be elected and he can play a role.
Like Emmanuel Goujon, do you see him as a prime minister?
It depends in the number of the members of parliament belonging to his party. We think that if he wins the majority in the parliament, President Kabila will make something on that way.
David Potty, we were mentioning in part one how the parliamentary vote is a confused process, what with, in some instances, upwards of 1,200 candidates in a single precinct. Tell us, how do you see that vote going?
Well, I think it's, as your other guests have mentioned, I think I could imagine something like a two-track strategy for Etienne Tshisekedi and UDPS. On the one hand, a pursuit of continue both international appeals and domestic appeals, hopefully that will only manifest themselves in peaceful demonstrations, to which they certainly have a right. But secondly, that the party will, along with other candidates, apply themselves in their legal capacity capacity to be present at the ongoing tabulation of the legislative results. The CENI has announced 30 of 169 compilation center provisional results for the Legislative Assembly, and so that's a real and important process that's ongoing. It is, in the Carter Center's view, compromised in many of the same important ways that we believe the presidential results have been compromised, namely the materials have been, in many cases, especially in Kinshasa, have been treated in a way that exposed them to the elements. They're massively disorganized. A great many documents were damaged, and 2,000 polling stations outright lost in Kinshasa alone out of 10,000. Given the high number of legislative candidates, that's a relatively few votes to spread around, as you rightly point out. In some cases, 1,400 candidates for a much smaller number of legislative assembly seats. And so lost polling stations are going to have an enormous bearing on those races and could very much have a determining negative impact for many candidates.
Emmanuel Goujon, I won't ask you how many elections you've covered in Africa, but I will ask you, what do you do? They're not going to start all over again.
No, and it's a move. I mean, on the long-term perspective, this election was better than the former one, and the next one will be even better than this one. So we have to see it in a broader perspective, I think, and try to challenge the real situation on the ground. The situation is what? We might have two leaders claiming the same position as the president. So I think it will be a real challenge for President Kabila to solve this situation without violences, without mass arrestation of opponents. What he has to do, I think, he has to talk, to mediate with Mr. Tshisekedi, to listen to the streets of Kinshasa, to understand that the Congolese, they just want peace now. They are not ready, I think, for another war or another civil war. But he has to manage that without violence. You know, his image is already very bad. The electoral process was not perfect, as everybody said. Even himself recognized some mistakes and errors in the whole process. During his swearing ceremony, there was only President Mugabe present, who is not really an example of democratic personality or democratic regime in his own country, Zimbabwe. So I think now he has to build on this situation in order to improve his image and to work properly for the Congolese people.
You mentioned the challenges. We're going to show you another one. Earlier in part one, we showed a map of Congo. We're going to show another one that highlights what, according to international donors, the country has less than 1/10. These are all the paved roads in Congo. 1/10 the paved roads that it needs. Now, I know that during the campaign there was the announcement of these so-called 5 great works announced by the outgoing president. Infrastructure, there's going to be public works, water and electricity, rebuilding schools, universities, etc. Some critics say that to do all of this, there's a barter deal that's been reached, most notably with those who are interested in the mining sector, the Chinese in particular.
Yes, the works has started, and I think that the re-election of President Kabila is due to the fact that he has started reconstructing the country. When people are criticizing him for this deal about mining, we are asking, what do we do with our mining if we do not reconstruct, rebuild our country? What do we do with it? Build the castles in Europe or America? We must reconstruct our country for our people. It is what we are doing under conditions that we saw them better than other deals we were doing with under Mobutu or other leaders. Maybe we can find better conditions, but according to circumstances in that time, when we were negotiating these works, it was the better conditions.
Laura Sié, do you agree?
Well, I think that it is important to acknowledge that the government has made some progress in improving infrastructure since the last elections, particularly if you're in the East. the deals that were made with the Chinese have resulted in more paved roads, in street lights in Goma, things like that were unthinkable 10 years ago. But I think if the government wants to maintain its legitimacy, it's really going to have to step up what it's providing to the citizens. And if you look at Kabila's speech this morning at the inauguration, he was very clear that this was his focus, that improving the infrastructure. But it goes beyond infrastructure. It goes to things like you have doctors in government hospitals and teachers in government schools who have not been paid salaries for 20 or 30 years. And the only way they earn money in a public setting is by charging their patients or their students directly for the services that they provide. And that is what has to change. That is not how a modern country can work. And it doesn't give people a lot of faith in government if they don't believe that the government will actually pay them for the work they do for that government. And so I think that there is a long way to go. I think that the government is aware of this problem, but I'm not sure that they have an effective strategy developed to really address that issue.
All right, we're going to also look at one issue that we've been asking you on the France 24 Debate Facebook page, what lessons for other elections on the continent in 2012. Dominic on Facebook says, lesson from the Congo poll, the West is willing to bankroll a charade while at the same time paying lip service to democracy and fairness, as long as it provides someone with whom to sign mining deals. Those mining deals, by the way, Emmanuel Goujon, have not all gone the West's way, have they?
No, not at all. Most of the time, the mining deals are done with China these days in Congo. And so they are the major people trying to get involved in this kind of development project. And the good thing for Congolese people, if we can talk about something good, is that Chinese don't commit themselves into the internal political life of the countries with whom they have deals. That's the big difference with Western countries and Western democracies, because we ask also some compensation for schools, things like that. Chinese, they invest, they even give a lot of projects, but they don't monitor, they don't bother about the political situation on the ground. And they would do deal with a Democrat or with a dictator, they don't care.
Your reaction to that, Minister?
We had no way to do out of working with those who are ready, those who are available to work and help us to rebuild our country. When you are on the whole, you don't look at the color of the hand that is trying to help. So that is the situation we met, and we will really appreciate if other partners can come in, helping us to rebuild our country. But since we don't meet in conditions we are ready to meet, we have to work with Chinese, and we will continue working with them, waiting others to come and join.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you, Lambert Mende, for joining us. I want to thank you, Emmanuel Goujon, as well, for joining us, David Potty from the Carter Center, and Laura Sie for being with us from Atlanta. And in part one, we spoke with Raphael Kashala of Etienne Tshisekedi's UDPS party. And thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for business, and that's hosted by Marcus Carlson.